Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Talking Team CBT. Today we have Dr. Heather Clague, who is a psychiatrist and a level 5 certified team therapist and trainer, and also part of our Train the Trainers group. So I love seeing you there. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So we like to start this off by asking, how did you get involved in team?
Yeah, so I was for many years a psychodynamic therapist, and I would get flyers in the mail for trainings. And I was having a patient who was having a lot of anxiety and panic and was feeling pretty stuck. And I got one of the flyers from David Burns's conference, Scared Stiff. And on the flyer, it suggested that maybe one reason that therapists weren't doing exposure is because therapists were afraid themselves. And I felt incensed and provoked. Me afraid? And so I didn't go to that conference, but the next flyer that came for his intensive, I thought, okay, I better check this out, especially because I am stuck with this client. So yeah, so then I went to his intensive, and I have to say I was blown away. And from there, I started taking a training with Jill Levitt, and then I joined a practice group with Phyllis Cedars. And I think it was a big switch of allegiance, because, as you know, there's tension sort of between the psychodynamic world, the CBT world, and I think they both have incredibly powerful things to offer. And I'm glad to, at this stage, be at a place where I don't feel like I have to choose between the two. But at the time, I felt some resistance to kind of fully embracing TEAM-CBT. And I remember the moment I'd been practicing TEAM for about 1.5 years, and I thought, I'm going to marry TEAM. Because I was having these amazing results with my patients, like things were happening so quickly. And also because I loved the people that I was training with. I just found it such a warm, welcoming, happy community. And I thought, if the people practicing this get along with each other this well, like, there's probably something really, really important here.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you say get married to TEAM. Good thing TEAM is polyamorous.
I have since gone on to have other relationships. It's true.
Yeah. I think that is a really important point for our viewers, those who are watching that may be interested or dabbling in different modalities. Is TEAM is pretty inclusive. You know, there is a structure, but it's pretty flexible. And let's be honest, therapists can choose what parts of structures they want to use or not. What was that? You know, like you said, that there was like this big switch of allegiance. Looking back on it now, how much of a switch has it been?
Well, I think for a period of time, I actually needed to practice pretty straight TEAM. I think to get it, the other thing about TEAM is it is such rigorous training. Because it's, there's a lot of discipline. It's broken into little modules that you can learn. And each of the modules is actually super helpful on its own. But when you put it together, in the right setting, there can be this dramatic transformation. And then I think once I learned that, then I felt more comfortable opening back up and holding it a little bit more lightly as a framework. And, TEAM is sometimes called TEAM-CBT, and sometimes it's just called TEAM, because I don't think it works really well with cognitive behavioral therapy methods, but I use it, actually, I would say, with psychodynamic methods. I use it with visualization methods. I have colleagues that use it with hypnosis. I think it can be used in a much broader context than just the cognitive methods.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I use it with faith-based tools as well. So you were provoked at first. You're like, no, I don't want to do this. And then you said you did decide to go to one of these because you were stuck with this one patient, and you care so much about your clients and your patients. You wanted to find the best possible solutions for them. So you went to this conference. You said you were blown away. What does that mean? Tell us a little bit about what that looked like for you. What happened? You're blown away.
Let's see. Well, I think I actually wrote a little piece about this, but when I first met David, I was a little, suspicious, right? He's very charismatic and he's funny. And I was like, who is this guy? And I didn't really trust him. And he was teaching about disarming and the 5 secrets. And And so I saw him, somebody asked a question that was somewhat challenging to him. And he just completely dropped sort of all of his ego and humbly disarmed it. And my jaw dropped. I was just like, wow, this like, he's really walking his walk. And he had invited feedback forms. And I think on my feedback form, I said something a little snarky. I don't think it was very kind, but I said, I was thinking that Dr. Burns was just this narcissistic guru type. But then I saw him using the disarming technique and really, and I realized that he's for real. And then, in his conferences, he reads the feedback out loud.
Yes, he does. Warning if you go to one of his conferences.
Right. And so he read that out loud, and I was like, wow, he really is for real. So, I think maybe it was the disarming technique of all the things in that first conference that struck me, that this idea that, you can accept a criticism and like the world transforms. Like it transforms you, it transforms a relationship, it transforms your sense of what's possible. Like, this idea that, he calls it the death of the ego. I sort of, my version is that I think you have to love your ego to death.
That's cute.
That, our poor little egos, they're just trying to get us attention and make sure that, people think nicely of us. So I have affection for that. But when I let that go and I don't make that the prime directive, like, yeah, I mean, it's okay to be that real deep knowledge that we are all flawed. And that's not just okay. It's like rich, it's normal. Like it sort of dispels that delusion of perfection.
That language means so much. And as we continue to expand TEAM, and I say we, but I mean, like everyone involved, into different cultures. I've been doing some training with various people from different parts of the world. And so the analogies they use in TEAM are a little different flavor than what we would use in North America. And how they do the 5 secrets is slightly different. And so I love what you're saying, that you're loving the ego. David says, let's slay it. But really kind of the effect is the same, in the sense that it kind of depends on what we're labeling ego, right? I think, we can get into defining terms, but it's an important thing as a practitioner that I always need to know, what does my client actually mean when they say this word, rather than sort of just jumping to some conclusion. Because we might actually be on the same page, even though it sounds so different.
And that, I think, is totally true about the sort of these different, arenas of therapy, right? Psychodynamic versus, CBT. Like, the deep truth is there for all of us to point at, right? And so they might be pointing from different perspectives, but they're all pointing at a deep truth. And so, I mean, I that's why I feel so lucky to have had deep training in one and then deep training in another, and then be able to kind of see that. And, part of David's brilliance was that he studied many different kinds of therapy. And I think he really pulled wisdom from many traditions into developing TEAM.
Yeah. I mean, he talks about his experience with Psychodynamic Workshop and how that really impacted him. So 100% love that we're not trying to recreate what's working, only take what's working and learn to let go of what doesn't. And I think that's a really great one. Well, let me ask you, what's something that has improved in your practice from learning TEAM?
Well, I think my alliance with clients has improved. Once I started using the evaluation of therapy session form, which is, just exquisitely sensitive, that all a patient has to do is check very true instead of completely true. Like, that, okay, there's something here, and I have now a means to access that. And, you can ask someone face to face, how's this going for you? And they'll tell you it's going fine. It's so hard to actually tell someone, if you have a criticism. And one other question on the forum is, it would be difficult for me to criticize my therapist. And they can just say somewhat. And then, right? And I think that's probably true for most people. It's hard to criticize someone to their face. So being able to bring that up, I feel like what used to take months can be addressed, in a session. And And I've seen people, I think that itself has been transformative, because how often in your life do you lay a criticism towards someone and they receive it non-defensively, with curiosity, with interest about your perspective? I think that's really healing for people. So that was a dramatic early change.
That's interesting because, here we're talking TEAM-CBT, right? And most people think of CBT as being cold and informal, and it can be. I went to a solution-focused therapist as part of my training. We had to try and dabble in experience a couple different modalities. And I remember thinking, man, and I'm very task oriented, like that's my nature. And I didn't like it at all. This well, what's worked for you the past, and all this solution focused thing. And there was no connection at the beginning. And you're coming from a psychodynamic technique, which I imagine was already very much important in therapeutic regard and alliance. And what you're saying is this team has helped you high speed that through the forms. And many of our listeners are team therapists and know what we're talking about, but basically we survey before and after every session. And the after survey, we also include, the Therapeutic Alliance. And you mentioned this one point, this 19 and a 20. Now, earlier we're talking about letting go of perfectionism. So explain to me how getting 20 out of 20 isn't a perfectionist mindset. And cheeky because she's laughing, but why would we be so worried about that?
Yeah, well, I'm not worried about that, actually. I don't want 20 out of 20s. When I see a client who only gives me quote unquote perfect scores, I actually think, oh, this is going to be harder, because they're too frightened to have a fully authentic relationship with me. Whereas basically that 19 out of 20, that one little dink off the empathy score, it tells you there's a little something there. And if it's addressed, it becomes this powerful way to solidify the bond. If it's not addressed, all those accumulative little misses, right, are what, create a lack of safety in the relationship, right? This is not a place I can show up fully. This is not a place where, my little awkward parts can be accepted. I have to polish them down and pretend that things don't bother me. Whereas, making just the barrier to entry to having even the smallest kind of miss be illuminated, I think, creates this very powerful form of connection.
I think it tells the client, I'm here for you at whatever the cost, whatever it takes, I'm here for you, and you can be as open and real as you want. And that's okay with me. And I love that you're actually looking I didn't want the 20 out of 20. And I'm with you. When I see 20 out of 20 all the time, right from get-go, I'm like, what's happening? And sometimes it is true, and we just have really good connections, right? But also part of me is it's important to have those moments of discussion, and you can't have the discussion if there's not open conversation about it.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think we're also training people about what intimacy is, right? Intimacy is, again, the ability to be there as your full, I don't even want to say flawed, because that makes it sound like this problem, but you're multifaceted, and again, the word messy comes to mind, but I don't mean messy, but I mean sort of not necessarily neat and tidy, like complex selves. And if two complex beings are together, there's going to be moments where little parts, rub against each other. And the intimacy is where you can talk about that and find a way to, I guess I would say, sort of lubricate it, usually with compassion and mutual understanding. Okay, we get to both be complicated people here.
Yeah. And I think that you're trying to find the right word, others flawed, or, because we hear David say these things. I think part of the problem is that we have a lot of negative connotation on words. We talked earlier about words, right? People, we say negative and positive emotions just because that's how we use it all the time. But really, is there such thing as a negative emotion? I don't know. I don't see any negative emotions there. So I think it's true of even the word flawed, or, why is that negative? There's some beautiful, you think of beautiful marble, there's all these ripples and nuances, and that's what makes it so beautiful. So, but we do get this trigger when we hear certain words. So I love that you're trying to navigate beautiful language for such a Beautiful example. Tell us a little bit about how team has affected you personally. Maybe give us a little example.
Well, I feel like it saved my life. I don't mean that literally, but pretty close. I went through a pretty traumatic divorce, kind of right at the same time. I think it was like maybe like I found out that my husband was probably going to leave me, and then I went to the intensive like a month later. And so I was, in this profound grief, but how grief can often be sort of a receding tide that reveals
Mhm.
other longer standing things that were there. So I was pretty depressed, and the team techniques were just so powerful. And I did some personal work in the consultation group I was in, and we did the double standard technique. And I was thinking all these harsh things about myself. And when I started talking to this dear, a colleague who was playing a dear imaginary friend, saying those things, I just was like, that is ridiculous. I know that's not true. Like how, I don't think you should think those things about yourself. This just really powerful, loving kind of voice surged out of me. And that double standard of like, oh, like I can talk to myself that way, literally blew me out of the water. I mean, what's cool about team is that we record moments like that. So I
Mhm.
had that recording. And so I listened to it afterwards, and I would feel down. I would listen to myself, kind of being, really having my own back. And that was quite transformative.
Uh, I- that I think everyone we've interviewed, and Dave, Daniel, myself, we can think of moments where we've had these like aha moments. And they're fairly short. Like you say, you're in a consultation group, you might be practicing something. I mean, you might be doing personal work. It might be something that's ongoing. But oftentimes I've had revelations where I'm just trying to demo something for someone else. And I'm training and I'm demoing, and all of a sudden, and I'm like, and I'm like, I gotta write that down. I think that's what, like, it just surprised me about team is this, like, you have these moments because everything is about how do we make this real? How do we make this practice? Let's stop philosophizing and
Yeah.
get down to business and really solving problems. Um, and even like you say, coming from a psychodynamic technique perspective, sounds like you can take a lot of that, what we might see as we being team or CBT, not team. CBT therapists might see as, oh, well, that's philosophical, and making that practical. Are there certain tools or aspects of psychodynamic that you find incorporate really well into team?
Well, I mean, David, the interpersonal downward arrow is a psychodynamic technique, basically, where
Right.
you're doing here and now processing of, what roles are we playing here? And, then using empathy to really, understand what that feels like to the client. And then if they feel safe enough, then you can sort of ask them to generalize, does that actually remind you of any other, like, has this happened to you in other places? So then they can start to see, in psychodynamic language, the transference, how they're kind of recreating a certain kind of relationship in the therapy. And what I love about it in the team format is it's very flexible because, you start with disarming. Like if someone, indicates, like I had a client who's like, I don't feel safe here. And so, I'm not gonna, like, I could well be doing something that's leading her to not feel safe. Right.
Mhm.
And so I can explore that and say, so, you're not feeling safe here. I'm doing something that's leading you to not feel safe. Right. What's my role here in our relationship? What am I doing that's causing that? And then she started describing it, and basically what came out was that I would be pretending to be nice but really having judgmental thoughts. And
Mm.
so that she shouldn't really, and then so my role is to be silently judging, and her role is to be defective and to be judged.
Mm.
And I didn't disagree with that. And in psychodynamic world would say you own the attribute, right? I mean, it's basically, we use the word disarming, but it's basically disarming. So, I didn't have to argue with her. That's like, no, I'm not judging you. Like I could just allow that to be there. And so again, she felt safe to know my ego wasn't going to come in and
Mhm.
defend itself at her expense. Then she could soften up and open, and really, then we could look at her part of it, which was the useful part to her, actually.
Sure. Yeah, that the death of ego, right? We get back to that, or stroking the ego. Making, if the ego feels loved enough, it doesn't have to rear its head to look for more approval, right? So we can look at that either way, however you want to look at that. And what you're saying is, hey, you have the space because I don't need affirmation from you. And so, because of that, I don't have to be defensive. It is hard. Let's be honest with people. It might be easy for some people more than others. There's times where it's really easy for me, and there's other times where I'm like, no, I want to defend myself. Like, no, I'm not judging you. It's the helping comes out. I gotta protect. Anyway, I would love to talk to you some more. We're actually already over time, but I just loved chatting.
Can I plug one?
Yeah.
Can I just plug one thing that I do,
Sure,
which
please
I've been leading practice groups in the 5 secrets. And I'm really excited about it because I think it's a great way to learn the empathy skills. And these are intended just for lay people. And when I do relationship work one-on-one, I'll teach people the 5 secrets, but I actually think doing it in these group settings is so much more powerful because people there's all this crosstalk and they practice with each other. So our groups are at feelinggreattherapycenter.com/ well, if you go to there, you'll see a page about our educational groups.
We'll put a link in the description. So just go to our description here on this YouTube video, and you'll see the link to Heather's great workshops. Thank you so much. And you run those pretty regularly. You have an ongoing one, right? And
we run them. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We normally ask the last question, which is, and I'm sure there's so many to pick from, but we ask, if every therapist, every psychodynamic therapist in the world were listening today, what's one thing about TEAM you'd like them to know?
Gosh, that it's safe to learn. You won't be betraying your roots.
I love it. No betrayal. Well, thank you so much, Heather, for being here. And thank you to our viewers and listeners. Please join us again next week for another Talking TEAM-CBT.